Ladies and gentlemen, we are live right now, as always, as you've heard me say, with one of my favorite unions, one I was a member of, one that I was building with. And this is not the first time we've broached this subject. What are we going to do about our schools? What is taking place? How can you and I help? So here, once again today, the president of the American Federation of Teachers, our dear friend and comrade, Randy Weingarten. Randy, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Mark. I'm good, Rev. I love calling you Rev. Um, I often say, because thank God everyone, in my circle right now is okay. So I often say that I am pandemic fine. But, clearly, I worry about the health of not only of our nation, but I worry about the social, emotional well-being of the kids in America, particularly our Black and brown kids and our kids who are vulnerable. And I worry about, how unsustainable the, job of teaching and learning has been this year, and yet how educators, because none of us have a magic wand against the pandemic, get the brunt of blame for essentially making sure that their workplaces and students' learning conditions are safe.
Well, let's start there since you mentioned it. What do we know? Has there been any research or any studies about the impact this is having on our school children, with everything being the way it's been?
So there's lots of there's lots of studies that take bites at this, but at the end of the day, just intuitively think about it. We have basically had a year of physical distancing, of social isolation, and that is taken a year out of the normal childhood development of children and young adults. So, frankly, any study that minimizes that is not helpful. We know that this means, that people have been, severely affected by it, and that's part of the reason that since last April we've tried to reopen in-school learning, figure out the ways to do it. And frankly, now most of the locals that I represent, we represent people in about 3,000 places across America. They are all open, or they are virtually all either open for in-school learning, or they will be open sometime in April. That's really good news. But that's the status, that's getting to the status quo, or getting just to that point is not enough. What we need to do is we need to actually figure out almost individually where kids are, and we need to meet their emotional, social, and academic needs. So this summer and the next school year are going to be really important for us getting kids' resilience back, for us getting relationships going again, for us really developing the muscle of social interaction, not simply the muscle of academic recovery.
So, how would AFT propose um, starting or engaging that process, especially on the emotional, social health? What would you like to see done? What would you like to see the Biden administration do?
So the first thing, the Biden administration has actually been, you know, absolutely terrific. And we have quibbles at different places. So, you'll and the press often, maximizes the, or really puts a microscope on the differences as opposed to the similarities. This is what I mean. We begged the Trump administration, when we saw this pandemic, we begged them for safety guidance so that you could actually make workplaces safe and learning places safe in the middle of a pandemic. We begged them for resources, including emotional and social resources, so you could start this work with kids, this kind of resilience work. And we begged them for data so that everything was not anecdotal. They basically said no to all three. We saw what they did with the CDC. We didn't get any resources to December, on and on and on. All of this, and we're using a private sector data outfit called Burbio to actually figure out what schools are open and what schools are open for in-person, not. Pretty embarrassing for the national government. So the Biden administration in 60, 70 days has changed all that. The CDC put its first guidance out beginning middle of February, like 2 weeks after they got in. They've, they keep on, it keeps on evolving. We just got the American Rescue Plan that has lots of money devoted to all the kinds of things that we need for rescue and recovery. And now it's frankly up to us, and this is going to take collaboration with school districts. It's not, the boss knows best, to really shape systemic program, not ad hoc program around what we need to do. So New York City, Michael Mulgrew has come up with a very good idea about how to deal with intervention, have intervention teams at most of the schools, try to figure out where kids are academically, then and lower class size in the in the places that have been worse hit, and then have a few other ideas. What we're talking about nationally is something that Jeff Canada did with Promise Neighborhoods, we've done with community schools around the country, and that is create a community school in a lot of places, wrap services around the school, meaning guidance services, nurse, social work services, have after school enrichment so that you also wrap tutoring around the school, wrap some family engagement around the school. And then what happens is that the school becomes kind of a full service place so that we're meeting the academic, the social, the emotional needs of kids. And that's what we're pushing in terms of the use of this money. And then the other piece we're pushing right now is to, parents with means, they're going to send their kids, if they can, to summer camp or to have an enrichment kind of situation for their kids. We need to do that for all kids. So when we talk about summer school this year, we're talking about, I am pushing very hard on enrichment, on joy, on creating resilience again, on kids getting their mojo back again. Because if kids feel confident in themselves, then the pathways to teaching and learning are going to be, much more open than if kids feel bad about things. And so the last thing I'll say is, you haven't heard the word learning loss come out of my mouth until right now, because this pandemic was not the fault of children. It was not the fault of teachers. In fact, the only person you could actually fault was, you could say that Donald Trump, by abandoning the attempt to recover, it's taken us much longer to get out of it than not. But the or abandoning the attempt to fight it. So we can't talk about the recovery in terms of a deficit model. We have to think about the summer and the next year as how we help kids recover and bounce back. Not all of a sudden there's going to be a magic wand and in 3 days in-school learning, they're going to bounce back from a year of this. We have to think about how this summer and this coming year becomes an escalator, an accelerator on all of these issues. And that's what my union and my members are, trying to plan for in terms of the summer and the school year.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that, because it's really ridiculous to think that this is to resolve itself in a matter of days or even months. So I like that. That's very comforting to hear. How have you been comfortable with educators having access to the vaccine and that rolling out in the best possible way? Are you comfortable with that?
Um, we are, as there's been more and more vaccine availability, the commitment to prioritize essential workers, including obviously the commitment to prioritize educators, is really coming to fruition. And so we're very grateful that Joe Biden made that commitment. Look, the CDC, we worked very hard last year to convince the CDC. We testified, we did all the stuff you're supposed to do about how important it was to have healthcare workers, nursing homes, and then essential workers, other essential workers, including grocery store workers and teachers, be in this 1A and 1B category. And you could see a sea change, Mark, from the last administration to this administration in going from the rhetoric to the reality. So, some places, let me just shout them out, some places, did it on their own, meaning Mayor Bowser in DC understood the importance of the vaccines as the third piece of the stool to reopen schools safely. The mitigating strategies of, layered mitigation like masking and ventilation and physical distancing. The testing, which is how the NFL and others were able not only to open, but to stay open, because so much of this virus is spread asymptomatically, including the new variants. And then vaccine access, which basically meant that if you got the vaccine, you're not going to get sick or very sick anymore, and you're not going to die. And so that became, those three things became the roadmap to reopen in-person instruction. And what's happened is we're out in the field again with another poll, but even as early as the beginning of February, we were seeing about 20% of our members had gotten the vaccine. 70% of them wanted it, which was really great news. And so we're hearing anecdotally all over that we're at 50 or 60% right now, but we're going to get some more data to see if that's real. The federal, so some places like LA, New York City, DC stood up their own vaccination program. Meaning when I say New York City, I'm talking about the teachers union, not Mayor de Blasio. The teachers union worked with the governor, stood up a vaccine program for educators, including our para support personnel. LA has these big stadiums where you kind of, drive in. LA is such a driving town. You drive in, you get your vaccine in your arm, then you stay in a parking lot for a little while. But the pharmacy program has been really terrific as well. And I think that the Biden administration should get a lot of credit in the negotiation of supply and in getting that supply to states and in getting those shots in the arms. And they should, I give them a lot of credit for that.
You mentioned the schools ultimately, which I also think is ideal, being sort of a one-stop shop for a lot of these matters. I mean, eventually, our children are going to be vaccinated too. And you and I talked about this some time ago. Do you envision ultimately that the schools themselves may be sites down the road?
They should. I mean, the schools should be sites. We know, and look, we need vaccinators. We have school nurses, but we need vaccinators. And because of the needs to keep, Moderna and Pfizer so cold, you got to actually, you can't use a school refrigerator or a school freezer. You have to have the process to do it. But we used to do this in schools. We used to have, the polio vaccine used to be given in schools like on a Saturday or a Sunday. And I do think more and more we should be thinking about how schools center communities, because schools, the focus of schools are children and families. So if we think about schools as the center of the recovery, then ultimately I think we are focused on the family, on the child, on the family, on educators, on support personnel. And that's going to be more of a circle of revival than any other circle we know. The only other places that play these roles are, our faith community, churches, synagogues, and things like that. So thinking about how we center revival and revitalization and recovery, that has to be the work right now. Other than that, what you're asking parents to do in the middle of 2 or 3 jobs is to get on the phone for hours and hours trying to figure out where a vaccine site is, or trying to figure out what to do to help their child. Center it in the school where the child is. That's the theory of promised neighborhoods, and that's the theory of community schools, and that's part of the reason why Jeff Kennan and I did an op-ed together in the Daily News a couple of weeks ago on this.
I saw that, and that in and of itself was extraordinary. But I mean, it speaks to, I guess, the moment and the urgency of the moment. Tell us a little bit more about how that even came about and just how important that is for the two organizations to come together, Randy.
So, it goes back to, so first, it just came about, Mark, because the two of us are talking about kids, and talking particularly about Black and brown kids, and talking about vulnerable kids, and talking about kids who are English language learners. And how do we make sure that we are actually reaching? How do we make the issue of excellence and equity real? And so ultimately, we said, why don't we do something together on an op-ed? He's done so many. It's not, everybody knows Jeff from Waiting for Superman, and they know him from the charter schools. But the idea about how you center on the whole child, and address well-being first and foremost, and how you support educators to do this. This is what the key of promised neighborhoods were, and this is what the key of community schools. So we just said, let's write something together, and that's what we did. But it gets to the bigger point, I think, of this. You have two strategies that have always happened in America. You have the pull apart, the chaos, the division, the fear of the other, and you have the we're all in this together. And what Trump did was, he was an evil genius on the chaos, polarization, pull apart, exploiting white grievance. And what many of us are trying to do, this is what education is about, is how do we celebrate diversity? How do we not fear each other, but take the best? And how do we make sure we are equitable, so that we have a ladder of opportunity through a lens of justice, so that everybody can thrive? It's not that, most people want the next generation, want their kids to do better than they have done. But that takes a ladder of opportunity. And it's not a hand up to a hand out to get up that ladder. Sometimes it takes a hand up. And so this kind of pull yourself up by the bootstraps, which is, what this vision of, I was poor, now I'm rich, and I'm going to pull the ladder up from after me because I don't want anybody else to get to where I am. That's crap. What we need to do in America is we need to make sure that people have a level playing field so that they can succeed for themselves and their family. Everyone wants the freedom to thrive. We have to create the conditions to do that. And that's part of voting. That's part of what unions do in terms of helping people have a voice and at work and have some power at work to increase their wages. And that's what public education is, pre-K through college. And I think that Jeff and I, in really actually have that belief system, but we have to pull together and we have to get out of this crisis together.
I would agree. Lastly, Randy, I've been saying that we've really in the past year been suffering under three plagues: the pandemic, uh, and these all affect our children as well and their emotional health. The pandemic, the police demic with police violence, and now we're seeing back in full view once again the pistol demic of gun violence, so to speak. And Lord knows, even though these most recent incidents did not happen in school, we know how often it does happen in schools and how triggering these types of events can be for our young people. So I would imagine when we're looking at, as you said, the long-term lens of making our kids whole again in schools, that you would also include some of those other issues, especially the issue of gun violence, right? Because now you
Absolutely.
got kids at home. We're not in a social environment. We're not in places where everything's weird and strange, and then folks are still out here shooting folk up.
It's so I would actually layer something onto that, Mark, which is I think we're in the middle of 5 crises that are all interlocking. It's COVID. It's the economic disparities that have happened as a result of that. It's the hate and the disinformation that leads to this kind of fear of the other that you see in policing and that you see in the Asian hate that we've been seeing. And unfortunately, it's also climate and the issue about the big lie and civics. So, and what has happened, unfortunately, in our society is words, because of the availability of guns, hate then is not just words spit at people, but hate then becomes the gun violence and things like that. And so all of this we have to actually deal with in terms of schools, respecting differences. I mean, it sounds a little kitschy, but if we have to find ways to teach young adults how differences don't become hate, incitement, and violence. And so all of that, you're absolutely right that it all hits the classroom door.
Mm-hmm.
Teachers have to deal with all of it. We have to stop pretending that all we're dealing with is math and English and then a test score. We have to actually really rethink accountability issues, because if we don't center education on the whole child and help them become critical thinkers and create a sense that you can get through anger and trauma without resorting to violence. Think about this kid in Boulder, Colorado.
Right.
What no shock that he had mental health issues, but we can't make guns so available that his issues then become the murder of 10 people.
I'm glad you included this information too, because let's face it, our young people are most susceptible because they're the ones who are front facing on all of these social media platforms, and that's where disinformation is targeted. So again, folks, Randy Weingarten's right. Our schools ultimately have to deal with all of these issues, and best to be prepared, best to know how, best to anticipate and have a plan, rather than all of us just fly by the seat of our pants. And of course, that's what AFT is doing. That's what it's always done, with all of its members and chapters and branches, and now working in solidarity with the Harlem Children's Zone and Jeffrey Canada. I think I think that's the good way to go. This is urgent, and it has to be dealt with. Randy, we always appreciate you joining us, and appreciate as well all of the hard work you've been doing. I've been watching some of the other events you've been a part of, and you have been a critical voice in all of this.
Thank you.
And again, I want to commend you what you said. I mean, I hope y'all heard Randy. This is not, and there's no overnight piece to this. We are not fully out of this yet, and we don't know the long-term impact on our young people. So we better have a long-term response to it. Real quick, though, before I forget, as we go, the summer session piece. So how many jurisdictions are really trying to ramp up the summer session? Is it too early to talk about that? Or
No, it's not. And frankly, one of the things that that concerns me about some of the current debate is that a Wall Street Journal or with David Brooks, they'll say, okay, we're done once you reopen schools 4 or 5 days a week. That is a start. That's not a done. And that's why I'm saying that this is really summer through next year, really thinking this through so that we help kids. So the American Rescue Plan, Joe Biden's rescue plan, put a lot of money forward for learning recovery, including summer and after school programs. And there was just a summit yesterday. You can see it on YouTube, that the Education Department, Dr. Cardona and Dr. Walensky did. And they put out 81 billion of the 122 billion that goes to public schools. They put that out, including summer money for summer. So anybody who's watching this, it's available for districts all across the country. New York City is going to do a summer program, a bigger summer program than it's ever done before. It's going to try to do it, obviously, in person. Misha Porter and Michael Mulgrew and the Principals Union are already starting to plan what to do. But it's really going to be about enrichment and fun and joy. And that's what we've tried to get people to do. The worst thing to do is you don't want to then have kids isolated by themselves with tutors this summer after they've been isolated by themselves for this whole last year. Yeah. And so it is it's very different. What we're pushing for is very different than what a Michael Bloomberg said in an op-ed in the Washington Post. You're not going to make up academically by just having tutoring. You gotta actually go and center on the whole child and have kids have fun again and feel a sense of joy and a sense of the future is in front of them.
Yeah. You've always emphasized, the in-person learning, the human interaction. And I thought about you as we go. I interviewed some of the college presidents during this ordeal, and they were saying how the virtual platforms in some schools, some colleges have actually increased enrollment.
Yeah.
But even they said, Mark, but be clear, there still is no substitute for the in-person learning and the human interaction. So people shouldn't get comfortable and think we're just going to be online here
right.
for and forevermore. And what Randy's saying is important, folks. And a lot of us as adults, look at yourself, y'all. You all know how many of you have had Zoom fatigue and all of that. So imagine a child. Imagine that. And lastly, folks, we can't trust educators with our children 7-8 hours a day, and then not trust them when it comes to planning long-term and foreseeing and really coming up with comprehensive agendas to address this. We can't trust them less than we do the politicians. We need to listen to them. So we need to listen to Randi Weingarten. We need to listen to AFT. We need to listen to Michael Mulgrew here in New York and others. So if we can trust them to teach our children, we ought to trust them and defer to them when it comes to making some of these plans. And so that's what I'm about. All of you should be about that. Folks, keep in touch with AFT, get involved in your local community and be informed about what's going on with the schools, even if you don't have a child in public school, because that affects you too. All right. These are our neighbors. These are other parents. This is a whole family piece. And I appreciate the holistic approach that AFT is taking. Thank you, Randy, as always. Okay.
Thank you, Mark. Be safe, be well.
All right.
And everybody, when you can, get your vaccine. When
Yes.
it's your time, get your vaccine.
That's right. Amen.
It's definitely a sea change.
Yeah. Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
All right, Randy, hold on while I end this live real quick.